In this video, I'll be working on updating this gorgeous MCM bedroom set. It's a beautiful set with a fair amount of damage on this one cabinet door right here, but nothing that a little work can't fix up. First thing to do is remove that cool hardware. So I just had to open this up, and I could easily see that this hardware was installed with just regular screws in the back. So all I had to do to remove it was unscrew the screws and take the hardware off. Next, I'm going to work on that damage. So I love this Quick Wood product. It's a wood filler, but it's also got a little bit of epoxy in it, and it works really well. It's a very strong bond. On the label it says bonds as strong as wood, so I really like to use it when I'm fixing up some major damage like this veneer. So you take it out of the tube, and it's in this little roll up that you have to cut off a piece that you want, and then you just mix it and knead it really well until both parts are completely combined. Once that's done, it should be really pliable, and then you can just press it into the areas that you need it in. So for this, I'm filling in this damaged, broken veneer. So I want to really press it down as much as possible, because it's basically going to become part of the wood. And I need it to not only, fix that damage, but also hold it together from future breakage. So I'm pressing it really well into the parts that are damaged and missing. And then you can see those little kind of like trenches where I'm taking my scraper and just kind of removing the excess from there. Just so those are still, uniform across the whole door, and I don't have to try to sand that out later, because that would be a lot of work for later. So that's what I'm just doing. If you have a flat surface that you're pressing this into, then obviously you don't need a scraper like I'm using to get it out of the grooves, but it's really handy for a piece like this. Okay, so now I'm ready to remove the old finish. So I started out using the heat gun method, which is really great a lot of times when you have a really thick top coat on the existing finish. For this piece though, it really wasn't doing much. You can kind of see that, a little bit is coming off as I scrape it, but it really was a very thin layer. So it wasn't really that effective to use this method. So I did finish scraping the top of this long dresser, but that's all I did. I decided to move on to sanding since it was such a thin layer, and I knew that it would be fairly easy to sand. I got out my orbital sander, and I started with a 120 grit sandpaper, and I just did a light sand for the top. I wanted to get the majority off with the 120 grit, and then I did another round of sanding with a 220 grit just to smooth it out just a little bit more. Now, it might look like I'm moving really fast, but keep in mind that this section of the video is sped up 5 times, so I'm actually moving in very slow motions, and I'm really taking my time with this. When you're using an orbital sander, you really want to make sure that you don't get any swirl marks. And the way that you get swirl marks is by pressing too hard or by moving the sander too fast. So I'm not using hardly any pressure when I'm sanding. I'm really just holding the orbital sander in place. So I'm just kind of moving it along with my hand, but I'm not applying any pressure at all. And then the other thing is I'm keeping it very straight and flat, and I'm not tipping it from side to side or on the edge or anything. I'm just holding it nice and flat. And a good thing to remember is to move it at a rate of 1 second, like per maybe centimeter or so. So I usually just count in my head, like 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, and so on, while I'm moving it very slowly. That's what I did when I first started out, so that I wouldn't go too fast. So that's just something that can kind of help you get the right pace. But I'll slow it down really quick right here so you can see the actual speed that I'm going. So yeah, you can see how slow that I'm actually going. This entire top took about, usually the top of a dresser takes about maybe 45 minutes or so, just for, the 2 layers of sanding with 2 different grits. So, when I'm sanding a full piece or more than 1 piece, it can take quite a few hours. So yeah, it's kind of a tedious job, but it really makes a huge difference when you sand all the way down to bare wood like this. So it's totally worth it in the end. Once I finished sanding the base of the piece, I moved on to the drawers, and I took them all out and I just stood them up like this so that I could sand the face of the drawers easily. When you're doing drawers, you want to make sure that you get those edges. That makes a big difference in the overall finish. And then I also sanded down the sides a little bit so that they would be ready for restoration as well. And then I moved on to the rest of the drawers and just sanded everything down with the same method that I used for the top. And I did the 120 grit sandpaper first and then the 220 grit. So as you can imagine, this does take quite some time. This was a 9-drawer dresser, and it also had the cabinet doors on it, and then there was a tall dresser as well, and the bed frame. So doing this entire piece really took many hours to sand. But I like to just put my music in my ears and try to do it all in about 1 day, so that I get the sanding part completely finished and I'm ready for the restoration process. Now for the base of the piece, it had this really pretty base and legs, and I knew that my square sander would work a lot better since it had, corners and not a rounded surface. So I switched to my square sander and I sanded away on the base. And then I went back to the orbital because I have some foam pads that I can use for the round legs that you can see here. I didn't show it because it was kind of a mess and the pads didn't stay on very well, so I really didn't want to recommend them. But I think in the future I would maybe sand these legs by hand or else use a stripping agent to remove the finish. And now I'm ready for that paint washing. So I used my favorite fusion mineral in Algonquin, and I made a paint wash, which was just a 50-50 mix of the paint and water. I put it in an extra container for saving, because I knew this project was such a big project that I'm going to be going back to that paint over and over. Painted it on, and then for this one I took a cloth and I wiped back the excess paint. So I don't always do that when I'm doing a paint wash, but for this piece I did. Really, it's just a preference. It's just kind of which way you like the look best. So now I'm going back to that drawer. So the wood filler has dried and I sanded it down, and then I actually applied a darker wood filler on top to try to help blend it in a little bit more. So I'm just sanding all that down until it's uniform and even with the rest of the cabinet. And now I'm painting over those spots with just the pure paint. So I'm not using a paint wash for this because I want to make sure that it blends as good as possible. And this is where you really have to just kind of mess around with it to get it just right. And, you know, it's probably not going to be completely invisible, but it's going to be so much better than it was. And you really just want to try to get it the best that it can be. You know, there's no way to completely fix or hide damage like this, but you can do a pretty good job. So my thought was that I would just put a thicker coat of paint on, covering up all the wood filler, and then I would do my paint wash once that dried. So once that paint dried, I took my paint wash and I painted over over that dried part. And then I carefully wiped back. And I had to do this quite a few times, probably 3 times. I sanded this down and then I tried again. And it just wasn't drying, good enough for me. So it took about 3 times before I, liked it enough to keep it. So I just kept applying the paint wash over the spots that were kind of showing a lot, and then really carefully wiping it back. And I just kept doing that until I was satisfied with the way that it looked. And it's not quite invisible, but it's fixed. It's not damaged anymore, and it looks pretty good, I think. So I'm happy with it. So once I was finished with that paint wash, I started my top coating in the evening in my dark garage, obviously. Now I used a product by the Real Milk Paint Company, and this is their finishing cream in the low sheen option. And it worked really well. I loved it. It gave a perfect smooth sheen that was not quite matte and not quite satin. So it was that in between finish that is really classic and timeless, I think. For the long dresser, I used a cloth to apply it, which you can do. And I just, keep that wet edge going and wipe it on until I've completely covered the whole surface. But you can also use a paintbrush, which I think I did that on some of the drawers and the bed frame. So that works just as well. I just kind of wanted to test out which ways I liked best and which way I would recommend. But they really both work pretty much the same. So you could do either. Now it's time to update that hardware. I got out my matte gold spray, and it's a Rust-Oleum spray, and I just sprayed everything down. You want to be outside, and you definitely want to have protection for your surface. I like to use these old boxes because the edges kind of tip up a little bit and really block any paint from getting anywhere else besides where you want it. So I gave the hardware a couple of different coats, or a couple of separate coats of the paint, and making sure you can see me walking around and spraying from different angles because I want to make sure that I get every area of the hardware and that I don't miss anything. I let that dry for about 24 hours, and I even put it in the sun for about an hour or so that it would cure really, really well. And then once they were dry, I installed them back into the dressers. And here's the final reveal. I just love how it turned out. Let me know what you think in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more tips, tricks, product reviews, and of course, furniture restorations. See you next time.